You wouldn't be here if we weren't absolutely convinced that you did this to these young ladies. Give me an explanation.
I have no explanation to give you for something I didn't do.
So you're just saying you just got a run of bad luck?
No, I'm not saying I had a run of bad nothing. I don't know these people.
That you're connected to them? Look at them. They're all staring at you, pointing their fingers. Well, if they could point their fingers, they're looking right at you.
This is the infamous story about Samuel Little, the stroke and choke killer, a serial killer with the highest amount of kills in United States history. The prophylactic serial killer in U.S. history got away with over 93 murders in almost 50 years. This shows you how biased our system is and how it failed us and failed the victims and was covering up a murderer. Between 1970 and 2005, Samuel Little allegedly murdered 93 people, according to his own confessions. That means he killed more people than Jeffrey Dahmer, John Gacy, and Ted Bundy combined. He claims to be the most prolific serial killer in American history, so why doesn't no one know his name? Little, who died in 2020, made his way across the country over the courses of decades, treating back alleys, pickup corners, and underbelly jukebox joints as his hunting ground, targeting prostitutes, drug addicts, often poor women of color, and disabled women. He would strangle them to death. His rap sheet of over the years was over 100 pages long. It included rape, assault, burglary, in-home invasions, even murders. And he was tried 3 times, but despite witness testimony from survivors, he was repeatedly acquitted and spent little time in jail. It wasn't until DNA evidence linked him to the murders of 3 women in 2012 that he was finally convicted for. Though he still maintained his innocence, and wasn't until author and journalist Jillian Lauren began looking into his story developing, a relationship that evolved into almost daily phone calls from prison that led Little to confess in graphic, disturbing details of his ghastly acts. In our system of justice, not only are perpetrators treated terribly in terms of racial equality, but the victims of violent crimes are more marginalized communities, people of color, women in general, sex workers, people with drug issues. They are not treated the same as, what I'm getting at. He preyed upon particular kinds of victims who he calculated wouldn't be missed. It's a horrible calculation that was wrong because obviously anyone's going to miss their loved ones, but he was right. His ticket to indulging real scrutiny, because those kind of victims don't raise concern in the highest level of law enforcement, helped him get away with his crimes for so long. It was a race against the clock when Samuel Little finally got the courage to start confessing his crimes from behind bars. Little, who said he murdered 93 people, mostly women between 1970 and 2005, which was his last murder, was serving 3 life sentences in California for killing Linda Alfred, Guadalupe, and Audrey Everett. The FBI gave him an unofficial name, like a nickname, Little, the most prolific serial killer in U.S. history, which his confirmed involvement in at least 50 slayings. Coincidentally, Little's name carried just that little recognition, which was said due to many of his victims being black, drug users, or sex workers. A judge in Missouri thought 3 months was an appropriate sentence for Little for rape and assault. Law officials in Mississippi in the 80s didn't believe it was possible to commit a crime against a black prostitute, and a tradition of many serial killers before him. He chose to dispose of victims society already thought were trash. Do you get what I'm saying? The serial killer at the California State Prison, Little, would admit to dozens of murders before his death, December 20th, 2022. Samuel Little, born on June 7th, 1940 in Reynolds, Georgia, a small town about 100 miles south of Atlanta. Samuel Little has told police he was 7 or 8 years old the first time he got the urge to choke someone. By the 5th grade, he was obsessed with a teacher who rubbed her neck in class and was fantasizing about killing a little freckled girl he knew. At the time, Little was living with relatives in Northeast Ohio. He told journalist Jillian Lauren that his teenage mother abandoned him as an infant, but Georgia officials declined to release Little's birth certificate, so the details of his birth could not be confirmed. At 13, Little was caught stealing a bicycle, he had said. He was sent to the Boys Industrial School, an Ohio reform school, according to a record released by the nonprofit Ohio History Connection. 2 years later, he was arrested in Omaha for burglary. According to a copy of his criminal history, a year after that, he was charged with breaking into a furniture store in Lorain, Ohio, and shipped to a juvenile detention center for 2 years. This began a lifetime of crime that ultimately would include dozens of arrests in cities across the country, assault in Denver, soliciting a prostitute in Bakersfield, California, theft in Philadelphia, DUI in Los Angeles, and shoplifting in Phoenix. Sometimes he was locked up for months or even years. Sometimes he beat the charges, winning acquittals on assault with a gun in Miami and an armed robbery in suburban Cleveland. But he also went back to a life of murder and aimless drifting, supported by shoplifting and the occasional odd job. By 1976, Whittle was being held in the Dade County, Florida jail on charges including grand larceny, resisting arrest, given permission to paint a massive mural on the jailhouse wall featuring such historical figures as Bessie Ross, Sitting Bull, and Benjamin Banneker. He was profiled by a reporter for the non-defunction Miami News. Then 35, Little told the reporters he had taken up drawings while jailed in Baltimore. There he said he painted portraits for Martin Luther King Jr. and then Maryland Governor Marvin Mandel. "I'm looking forward to the day I can get out and open a studio on the beach," he said. "The next time I'm out, it's to do or die." Little told the reporters he had been jailed 16 times, though records suggest it was more like 34 at the time. The article appeared under the headline, "16-Time Loser Finds Himself." By then, according to his recent confessions, Little had already killed more than a dozen women. These are the missing signs. Mary Browsley had been dead for 3 weeks when a man and his 15-year-old son, out hunting on Sunday afternoon, stumbled across a body in a shallow grave. Clad in a multicolored dress, underwear, and a metal necklace, the dead woman decayed beyond recognition and carried no ID. Police ran with random of her fingerprints but found no matches. Authorities were struck unsure who the woman was or how she had died. The medical examiner incorrectly estimated that she had been between 50 and 60 years old and in the ground for about 2 months. Strangulation almost always leaves physical signs such as bruising, pinpricks under the skin, bleeding in the face, or fractures of the hyoid bones in the neck, said Gary Watts, president of the International Association of Coroners and Medical Examiners. But Watts and other experts noted that this physical evidence decayed with time and that Little killed his victims under circumstances likely to leave fewer telltale marks. A person impaired by drugs or alcohol is easy to suffocate without a struggle. For example, younger people tend to have more flexible hornoid bones and thyroid cartilage, making a fracture less likely. In Browsley's case, her body laid decomposing for weeks before it was discovered, allowing physical clues to degrade. By the time they found her, Miami police weren't even sure their Jane Doe had been murdered. The woman's blood alcohol levels so high between 0.29 and 0.37, it was possible she had simply dropped dead. Police deemed the death suspicious but not label it as homicide, despite the fact that someone had buried the body. That was a pattern among Little's confirmed and likely victims. In some cases, the failure to recognize that a murder had been committed led to abbreviate criminal probes. In a case like this, you've got detectives dealing with a whole lot of cases, and this woman is a sex worker or homeless. There's nothing to tie her to anybody in particular, said Garrett, the former FBI agent. You do the primary stuff, fingerprints and DNA, and there are detectives who do more than that, but you sort of have to get lucky. In 1974, Martha Cunningham, a 34-year-old black woman, disappeared in Knoxville, Tennessee, on her way to a New Year's Eve church service. According to her sister, Jessica Lane Downs, when they found her body, police told local reporters it was covered in bruises, and the autopsy noted that her purse and jewelry were missing, that her stockings and underwear had been pulled down to her thighs, and that her dress slip had been pulled up. Still, the autopsy found no obvious cause of death, noting Cunningham's history of seizures. Local authorities told the Knoxville News Sentinel that the death appeared to be from natural causes. In 1977, Marianne Jenkins, a 22-year-old black woman, was found naked, but for her jewelry, officials in Illinois incorrectly concluded that she had been killed in a lightning strike. In 1944, authorities in Pine Bluff, Ark, found the naked body of Delonda Jones, 26, a black mother of 2 in a vacant house with a crack pipe underneath her thigh. Medical examiners found no obvious signs of trauma, but did find cocaine in her blood. Her death was ruled an overdose. Years later, the FBI notified local police that Little had confessed to killing a woman in Pine Bluff. Police said her produced a painting of a woman that resembled Jones, offered details that seemed to match Jones' case. It was like he was there with us when Jones' body was found, said Terry Hobson, a retired deputy police chief who was on the scene. A quarter century after her death, Pine Bluff police forwarded Jones' case to local prosecutors. Brosley was still a Jane Doe when officials became a murder victim in 1982. Joseph David, the chief medical examiner in Miami, opened her file during a routine review of unsolved case. The way she had been partially buried prompted him to reconsider the manner of death, police said. It was changed from undetermined to homicide. Police still knew almost nothing about the victim. She appeared to be an alcoholic female with 2 old injuries, strangled, killed, and buried. Davis wrote in a memo to police, a salon, hanger on, type might be considered. 35 more years passed before an investigator with the medical examiner's office, a special unidentified remains, picked up the file. The investigator, Brittany McLaurin, plugged the description of the body into a national database of missing persons launched about a decade earlier. McLaurin quickly turned up a report of a missing Massachusetts woman who had lost parts of a pinky and had a medical implant in her hip, just like the unidentified body. The woman, Mary Brosley, also had said to have natural auburn hair and that she occasionally dyed blonde, another match. McLaurin contacted a dental expert who compared the body's teeth, Brosley's dental records. Then McLaurin called the police and said he has identified their Jane Doe. It would take another year to find Brosley's killer. In May 2018, Miami-Dade detective David Denmark got a call from James Holland, a Texas Ranger investigating a serial killer who had confessed to strangling women in South Florida. Miami detectives scored their archives for unsolved drawings and strangulations, settling on 2 that seemed to fit Little's profile. One was a white, mentally disabled sex worker named Angela Chapman, who died in 1976. The other was a Brosley. Little then began being held in the county jail in North Texas. Agreed to meet Denmark in exchange for a pledge not to use his confessions to seek a death sentence. Denmark finally interviewed Little in October 2018. It was a disoriented experience, he said. Instead of aggressive interrogation, Little required patience. Denmark learned to listen to his stories without interrupting, to laugh at all of his little jokes, to let his memory slow unspool. Little began with Chapman, who was 25, when he said he had sex with her, drove her out of the Everglades and tried to drown her. He took her out of the water as she passed out, brought her back to the shore. He said when she woke back up, he choked her again and killed her. Then Little mentioned another murder, his very first. He said he'd met the woman at a bar, North Miami Beach, a blonde who walked with a limp. He said she told him she was from Massachusetts and that she had run away. He said he drove her to a secluded area, strangled her, buried her in a shallow grave. Detectives showed a little photo of Mary Brosley. He said, yes, that's her. Unanswered questions? Daryl Brosley had long wondered about the mother who vanished when he was a child. Once a bright student said that endured a long line of violent men. One picked up during a fight, threw her down so hard she needed hip surgery. Another was Daryl's father. He remembered watching his dad throw a drinking glass at his mother's head. His mother wounded up, divorcing alcoholic, forced to give Daryl and his younger sister to foster care. Eventually, a great aunt took them in. The last photo Daryl has of his mother was taken at his first communion. She showed up with a new man in town, then disappeared from her son's life for good. Eventually, Daryl started telling people his mother died in a car crash, but he liked to imagine that she had just run off to a new life, or even maybe married a billionaire or millionaire. Last year, he got the chance to find out for sure. His auntie called saying she had news. Daryl couldn't decide at first what he wanted to hear. In the end, he called back. The aunt said his mother had been killed in Florida, that her body was found by hunters. The aunt police believed that killer was a man she'd met in a bar. His mother really had been dead all these years. Daryl hung up the phone and cried. A few months later, a local reporter told him his mother might have been the victim of a serial killer for the first time. Daryl heard the name of Samuel Little. Soon the story was everywhere. Dozens of police departments was interviewing Little, saying his confession had helped solve dozens of cases. In October of 2019, the FBI identified Little as the most prolific serial killer in the United States history, with 93 confessed victims, more than Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer combined. An ex-girlfriend texted Daryl to say she had seen his mother killed on TV. Now 59 and still living near Boston. Daryl knows police had fewer tools at their disposal when his mother was killed. He also knows his mother was easy prey. But he said he struggles to understand how Little permitted to kill vulnerable people again and again, 92 more times. It's hard to fathom. I mean, how does someone get away with that? Jesus, he said, I can't even come to terms with that number. Samuel Little glided his car to a stop in a secluded area of Route 27 near Miami, cut the engine off before long. Mary Bosley had straddled his lap. He started playing with her necklace. He'd met her at a nearby bar drinking away the final hours of 1970. She was a frail, vulnerable woman about 5'4" and anorexic, barely 80 pounds. The tip of her left pinky finger was missing, sliced off in a kitchen accident. She walked with a limp from her hip surgery. Bosley said she had left a series of lovers, 2 children in Massachusetts after endless confrontation about her drinking. Estranged from her family, struggling to survive, she was the kind of woman who might disappear from the face of the earth without attracting much notice. Little admired the way the moonlight illuminated her pale throat. I had desires, strong desires to choke her, he would later tell the police. I just went out of control, and I guess she died. By New Year's Day, 1971, Mary Bosley, 33, had become the first known victim of a man since recognized as the most prolific serial killer in U.S. history. Over more than 700 hours of videotape interviews with police that began in May of 2018, Little, now 80, has confessed to killing 93 people. Virtually all of them are women, in a murderous rampage that spanned from 19 states in more than 30 years. A gifted artist with an unnervingly accurate memory, Little had produced lifelike drawings of dozens of his victims, and with the fervor of an old man recalling the exploit of his youth, he has provided police with precise details about their murders, invariably affected by strangulation. Across the nation, police have spent more than 2 years using that information to reopen cold cases, investigating, and attempting to bring closure to families who have waited decades to learn what happened to the mother who vanished, the sister whose suspicious death was never explained. If Little hadn't even confessed, then none of this would have even been solved. A Justice Department official who worked on the case, federal investigators believe his confessions are 100% credible. In the end, yes, Samuel was caught. But why did it take so long for the justice system to find out that this man killed over 50 women, drug addicts? It doesn't matter. He killed over 63 people, and not everybody really knows his name. You guys need to know his name. That's why I did this, because I feel like it's important to know that there are people out there that are capable of doing things of this extent. And he was gonna hold his innocence until he died. He just happened to just not care anymore and want to tell his side of the story because he wanted to get famous off of it. But then again, it's like he wanted to get famous, I feel like, for the wrong reasons. I want his story to get famous because look at the amount of victims that were taken away off of just the police not doing their job. Basically, if you're a prostitute, black, homeless, a drug addict, or any of those sorts, they're pretty much saying you're not high priority. I feel like if you're a human and you live on this earth in the United States, it shouldn't matter what your level of, your situation is. No case should go unheard. But this is the story of Samuel Little, the stroke and choke killer. Even though he didn't help the detective solve all 93 cases that he says that he committed, he was able to get them to be able to solve 53 of those cases out of 93, which is a good amount of people. There still are a bunch of cases that are unsolved right now that have the FBI in a reary, and they really just want to get those cases closed. A lot of people feel like that's not closure for the families because the person that did it is not even living anymore, and they don't have answers for why he did that. But then again, we just have to be grateful that he was caught. It doesn't matter the time limit. Murder doesn't have a time limit. We just have to be grateful that he's caught. And to be honest, it's actually a good relief that he's actually passed away now. I mean, it's not really good because we didn't get to figure out everybody else that passed away. But for the most part, I just feel like the whole situation and his story, it should be heard. Thank you guys for watching. I really do appreciate it. I hope this was informational. I hope it wasn't too boring. Just make sure you guys like, comment, and subscribe. And I'm going to have more videos for you guys soon. Thank you.
You pick up these young ladies that are out working Western or Figueroa or whatever in the middle of the night. You have sex with them. You kill them. and then you dump their bodies in alleys throughout the city of Los Angeles, most of them not too far from your house. There are, you see the number of faces here. That's how many families are affected by this. Families that have been suffering with this for 25 years. Parents. You're a parent, you've got young children, or not young children, but you've got children. What do you think it would feel like to have your little girl murdered, dumped in an alley, and not know how that came to be for 25 years? But somebody left their DNA signature, like their thumbprint, on my little girl. 25 years, over a number of these, for 25 years, all the way up until recently, just a couple of years ago. That person continues to leave their DNA thumbprint on all these young ladies who had a life, had families. They may have been out working, they may have had some drug problems, whatever, but they still have loved ones. And that's your little girl. That's your little girl out there, and some guy that's got a problem, he keeps picking them up, having his way with them, killing them, dumping them in alleys like they're trash, but he's leaving his mark. It's like a dog pissing on a fire hydrant. That's you. You're leaving your mark every single time you do this. Well, now the science has caught up with you. Mr. Franklin, your signature is on every one of these young ladies. There's no denying that. There's no getting out of it. You need to man up and start talking to us what in God's name caused this to happen, caused Mr. Lonnie Franklin, when he's not working on a car, when he's not with his wife and children, when he's not driving the trash truck or fixing a police car in a garage somewhere, why he's out creeping at night and he can't control himself, or he just whatever. But how did this happen? These families, just like you would want to know if something
I don't
happened.
creep at night, man.